Okay, so you were telling me about information problems being the hardest
Quite.
class of problem.
I mean, not the hardest. There's really, really hard problems, but
Okay, but then
I would, I would say the
centralized
most.
systems come along, solve these problems in an unhealthy way, but get away with it because of a lack of alternatives, a spectacle being made about it, and general unawareness from the general public as to why a centralized model is not a good model.
Right. So, I mean, think about the cloud.
Yeah.
The cloud. I've had to deal a lot with the cloud in the last few weeks, and at the end of the day, the cloud is just someone's computer, right? Like maybe a lot of people's computers, maybe a lot of data centers.
Mm.
It's like a nice API that lets you forget that there's like a bunch of people plugging physical cables in and making
Mm.
sure that things don't light on fire.
Yep.
Um, and it's sort of the only way people start new projects anymore is by putting them on the cloud, right?
Right.
And not even anymore to the big cloud provider, but usually to some little company that's come along and figured out a slightly better DX on top of the big
Yep.
cloud provider.
Yep.
Um, and so you've got these chains and chains and chains and chains of it's separating you from just running useful code in a way that's beneficial to you and the people around you. Like more middlemen, kind of doing two things, right? Taking your money, increasing the amount of cost for every single layer you go out from the actual physical hardware,
Mm.
and then finding some sort of way of capturing your data and commercializing it for themselves, right?
Right, but not always increasing the cost because if you only want to use a computer for 2 seconds,
Mhm.
some guy will do that for you for a fraction of a cent. That's a way cheaper way to do it than buying your own computer.
And I mean, if you get to a real workload, I think lambdas end up being more expensive than self-hosting. Down to not self-hosting, but hosting inside of your own long-lived cloud service, basically.
That is true dependent on your workload. If you have a spiky workload, then you need to maintain enough capacity to handle your high watermark. And if there's a large difference between your high and low watermarks, the cloud model can be significantly economically better
Mhm.
for you. And in which case, you probably want to tackle your base load with your own servers and then call out to the cloud. But it makes it quite difficult the way things are designed to run some on your stuff and some on theirs because um, they sort of have this natural affinity to want to be everything. They don't. They're not made to play well together. So where I got to with the latest mental model of how the Dreamcatcher should be is that in Deno, there's a product they have called Deno Subhosting,
Mhm.
which is effectively allowing you to provide to your customers the same thing that Deno provides to you, which is an isolated hosted environment that only you have access to. And so it allows for you to have genuine multi tenancy at the cloud hosting level, the same as Deno offers you multi tenancy with other people who use Deno Deploy.
That's cool.
And so, what that means is, or what that's primarily geared towards, is to allow your customers to write their own code, their evil, nasty, could be anything code, and run it in true isolation from every other customer's code. That's sort of what that was all about.
Right.
And so, the model I think is the correct model is that each of our customers or a member of the Dreamcatcher that's using our hosting service would be spun up with a sub hosting slice where all their data was their repo for their home repo and their sort of other repos that they want to use. And then it's genuinely isolated at the at more than just a logical level. Like it's a different Git repo.
Right.
And then if you want to pull off the hoster and go run it yourself, you can. And if you want to do a mixture, you can. And that's sort of where I got to with the model, and where that's good for commercial stuff is no one wants to let you touch the financial system if you can't block people's data.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. If you can't stop it from happening, like
Yeah,
they're only gonna give you the keys to the account if you
yeah.
like
If
if
you're in
you
control,
yeah.
and by extension, that means that they're in control because you beg them, and then you make your users beg you, and all that. And so, why I like the model I'm trying to wrangle with or figure out a way to present so that I can get a commercial entity stood up and charging commercial financially approved money through
Yeah.
Stripe is that the Dreamcatcher is a network of all these instances of this little program that's running. Those instances are able to communicate with each other using the internet. I would set up a hosting service that would offer to run these programs on your behalf. But if push comes to shove, I can see inside them. And if you store bad things there, I can kick you off. And that means that I can say, hey, Stripe, give me access to credit card charging. I am in control. And then if people want to do bad things, someone else can set up like a cryptocurrency only hoster. But critically, the systems will be able to communicate with each other on some level. So I think I can block all forbidden material from entering our hosting service. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't use our hosting service to like control a remote repo that was doing something else, so long as the offensive data never entered our network. I think that's all I have to do.
Yeah. I think there's an interesting way of testing the coherency of the system, because like the way you could sell that to a payment provider is like you're basically charging for hosting. Like
Yeah,
when you take money from people, you're charging for hosting, right?
that's right.
um, can you, if someone else wanted to go off host, like can there still be some kind of a financial connection between their like subsystem and your subsystem?
Yes and no. The the most contentious piece is the fact that the attribution of or the payments that go out to people who contributed to make the usage of the software that we're hosting possible,
Mm-hmm.
that calculation, that data is stored not with us. It's stored on the Dreamcatcher network. Don't know where that is yet. And so if you, let's say that someone set up the Ethereum gateway for the Dreamcatcher, it took payments in Ethereum, it offered hosting for your stuff, and on there some knowledge, some work product came out, something that the Stripe side used.
Mm-hmm.
The attribution table on the network overall would reflect that work, and so some of the Stripe collected money would be allocated to be collected by or sent to these people that did the work on the dark Dreamcatcher or the crypto Dreamcatcher. So the financial flows would go like that. But as far as I can tell, how we disperse that money is our business. How we figured out what the dispersal is, so long as we're not ripping people off or, being bad with it, and so long as the people that receive the money um, have passed KYC with Stripe, we can actually use Stripe to make those payments. or we can just make them ourselves, which could be just we'll just buy some cryptocurrency and then pay them in crypto. I don't know.
Some, I think it makes sense to me. It's like almost like derivatives a little bit, right? When something moves up here, something changes down there. Like you have one universe that's like a mirror universe to the other.
Right.
Um,
So the contention seems to be if I can just paint out all the messy pieces and then see if we can connect them together, maybe.
yeah.
I'm not sure there's a way to. You can make the contracting part to the part that is I'll give you some money if you build this thing that doesn't exist yet. Like you can turn that into not a security because it's like, well, you bought the software, you
Right.
you paid funds to have some work done. That's a pretty standard relationship. The issue comes in allowing people to trade the contribution that they hold, the record of contribution, so that, like, for example, if I did a bunch of work on a piece of software, I got paid for it, but then that software goes on to be wildly useful. Like, say it was a new zip algorithm, and then I offered to sell my contribution to some other guy for $1 million. That kind of activity starts to sound like security because it's an expectation of profit, and it's those royalties being generated that is the expectation of profit.
Are intellectual property rights the same things as securities though? Like you.
Well, it's not about the. First of all, there's no intellectual property rights, as best I can tell, if we make all the software GPL licensed.
Right.
And so long as we're not guaranteeing anyone a revenue share, I'm like, it's not that you couldn't argue about this thing and win. It's the fact that you even need to have an argument in the first place, I guess, is my problem. It's not clear that it isn't a security.
Right.
And I think you could easily make it one by promising someone that they're going to make a bunch of money off it and selling it to them. And now you've just securitized the thing.
Well, so what if you took the class of actions that would turn it into a security and made them illegal? Like made them heavily penalized. Like, if it was found that somebody promised like that, that then like they retroactively wouldn't have the rights.
Yep. I guess what I'm wondering is would the SEC see it that way, and do I have the time and the effort to even argue about it with them? Is there a way to avoid all this?
Yeah. Um,
Because ultimately, I'm sorry, cut you off.
well, I'm just thinking, I like more and more crypto related stuff is getting mainlined
Yeah,
all the time now, right? I mean, there's going to be a Ethereum like spot ETF soon, right?
I thought
So
that
it's
it was.
oh, it did it? Okay.
Mm.
It's you know, the more time goes on, the more like real crypto becomes in normal security land, right?
Yeah,
What
but
I think is still in,
it's still like security grade promises are a bad thing, and they should be regulated. They should be regulated more than they are now, but the cost of compliance shouldn't be as high as it is. And so I just wonder if we couldn't come up with a set of rules and a corporate structure that exceeded by far.
that's that's what I was going to say is I think that if you if you framed it all as the problem of how do you present yourself as the person who has the answer to, how is this stuff regulated? If you do the SEC's job for them in a certain sense, and you say like, this is where we plant the flag of good morality in this domain, and like, here's how we algorithmically enforce it. If you present yourself as the securities regulator, and I understand that's like a huge task to bite off, right?
Not really. Like we've spoken about that at depth. We even created an NFT for it, the Securities Guardian, which was intended to be like, I'm pretty confident that we could make a group of LLMs that could detect when someone was trying to make security class claims about some of our data or some of the work records that were going on. I think we can detect that and we can slam it and be like, no, mate, you can't say that. Because like to your earlier points about, why people get away with doing stupid stuff with money, it's because people in general, they engage with the world with their naked brains. They don't have an LLM that they trust that sort of shapeshifts it or reminds them about all the stuff they don't know. Like if if Warren Buffett trained himself an agent and he used it every day, I would probably want to use that. I would be like, I want that.
Mm.
And so if we sort of bolted on the system that anytime you enter the area of the Dreamcatcher that starts to talk about future returns or return on investment or anything like that, we can sort of circuit breaker it and be like, bang, like, sorry, you can't say that because, you're enticing someone to buy something from you because they're allured to future profits. And the lure of future profits is what caused the stock market crash in 1939. And we can't have that here. So,
But it's one of many things, right? It's like, well, anyway, whatever. So I agree. I think that like making sure that there's some sort of interpreter that sits between you and like the actual system is probably the best way to make sure that people are caught. But I still think the interesting question is, what do you do when, because people will come on and engage in the behavior they're used to. They're going to try and capture it. They're going to try and
they're going
like
to
make
try and pump and
promises.
dump it.
They're going to try and pump and dump it. So like, what does shadow banning look like? What does shadow banning look like on the Dreamcatcher? How do you stick these people in a sandbox where they can only harm themselves? And is that even the right thing to do? Like, is a total ban the right thing to do? Do you say, sorry, but like this money will be returned to you and can't be engaged in the thing because you're trying to securitize it? Or do you say, like, how do we train this person to be a good actor?
And when should it kick in? It's almost like if it was at the point of sale, like if the Dreamcatcher had a built-in mechanism of how you could trade contribution tokens, anytime that happened, you had to pass some sort of a semantic or natural language test where the agent said, now, why are you buying this? What is your expectation of profit? And if you answer wrong, it's like, sorry, we can't let you buy this because you think that this is a security. What you didn't decide that it was a security, but you're looking at it in a way that only a security can be looked at, and we don't sell securities here, so your attitudes are wrong and you can't proceed with this purchase.
Yeah, so it to me this feels a little bit like the trust and safety research I read about a while back, where
Right.
they were trying to figure out, like doing psychology research, trying to figure out what would prevent somebody from coming on and posting the type of stuff that would get you shadow banned and like kicked off of platforms. And like generally speaking, just a very simple, like positively framed intervention that's like, hey, did you know you might be hurting someone really badly by saying this, is enough to like clear 90% of the most nasty stuff you see online.
Right. Like that's all cool, but like I don't want to have to do all that just to get running, I guess,
Yeah.
is my thing. So if I can I think there was another component that I wanted to lay out for you and so that you know the whole thing that we've been talking about and thinking about right at the moment. We need some injection capital, like some starting capital, and we need it in a way that others can mimic in a safe way. And so the way that traditional capital works is you have a company, you split up some equity, you sell it off for X dollars, and you trust the management team of that company to do something positive with it. Now, I'm not entirely sure that the Dreamcatcher can be built and successful without that kind of an actor on the field for two reasons. Like if you imagine we had all the money in the world that we'd ever need, you still wouldn't get enough interest from other people. And there's a lot of interest in like, hey, this sounds cool. How do I make some money from it? And you're like, well, you just asked the securities framed question there.
Yeah.
And we don't have any securities. So the answer for you, my friend, is no. And because they don't want to have to learn how to contribute. But then on the other hand, they want to just put some money in and sit back and watch it, right? So one of the ideas we researched was some of these crowdfunding platforms are regulated in the United States with the SEC and can raise up to $5 million US a year. And basically, it's traditional equity, but in a crowd-funded sense. And I just was wondering if maybe having an entity that sold some of its stock for crowdfunder shares and then was, under management, run by people who were basically saying, you don't know what you're doing, we do, give us your money and we'll deploy it. And then that will turn into contributions that this company made. And those contributions will be paid out to in the future by the Dreamcatcher attribution system.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was thinking of doing. And I wanted to check with you what the pros and cons you thought of that was. And, maybe I'm being paranoid. Maybe we could start without traditional equity in the system. But also, it's almost like the Dreamcatcher needs to become a crowdfunding platform where each task or project is a regulated security that's just very, very cheap to issue.
Yeah. So the problem with the first most immediate problem that I see with the real equity floating around in the real world is people try to sell it. People will try to exercise it like it's an ownership stake in the company. People will try to, if there's any even slight amount of success, somebody's going to try and capture as much of it as possible and assert their will.
You mean if we did a crowdfunding platform raise and ended up with some kind of commercial entity
with traditional equity? Yeah,
right.
The
key there is that this entity is just another actor in the system. It holds no control reins.
Right.
So it's not
right. So you could
a payment gateway. It's not the owner of the code licenses. It's not the hosting company. It's simply an actor in the network that looks like a developer going around, like a superpowered developer going around and doing development work, is what it looks like.
I'm on board with that for the most part. you won't be able to get a payment gateway without some sort of entity attached to it, right?
But that's a separate. That was going to be a separate entity, so I would register a Delaware corporation to get full access to Stripe's purchase payments, and I was going to have just one entity that was it acted as a hoster and a payment gateway, and it charged people use their credit cards to prepay a balance on that hosting platform,
Yeah.
and then they could do restricted things with that balance. They could only do things that the gateway controlled, like for example, purchasing hosting usage. That's fine. Possibly purchasing software construction, like asking for things to be done, maybe. And super contentiously, and probably not, purchasing contributions that have already been made. So that last one is probably going to have to be left out. But
It might not have. It might not have to be if the purchasing contributions is if you cost it as running a piece of software, right? Like if the thing that's buying the contribution is the code that you're just, paying for the code that's running, the same as you pay for any other code that's running. You could.
like you bought, so like you bought it so that you didn't have to rent it. Like you bought the cow instead of just paying for the milk. That's quite interesting.
That governs the contract that governs the addition of money into the pool is just another piece of software in the system that you pay to use it like you pay to use any other piece of software in the system. It just is a higher payment, and what it does is it keeps track of the money pool internally.
Do I
But again,
understand correctly in saying that? Say I had, say you made a Fibonacci LLM,
mhm,
and I had been paying the hosting company and I'd been using it, and
mhm.
then and of my purchase from the hosting company, a portion of that kept going to you because you made it, and then I was like, I want to buy that so that less of my usage goes to that guy.
Well, no, what I mean is like buying buying an API call on the money pooler program is just another program interaction, right? So like you don't once it hits the program, like the money gets distributed however it gets distributed, right?
Yeah.
That's your contract here. If I buy an execution of the Fibonacci program,
Hmm.
it's the same thing on some level as buying an interaction on the money pooling program. Just the cost is a little bit bigger for the money pooling program because the money distribution happens in a wildly more complex way.
So have you thought of the stock exchange of the
Yeah.
Dreamcatcher as just another app?
Yes.
And instead of it being like a fraction of a cent per API call, it was like $100 per API call.
Yes.
And what did I get for that? Well, I updated this database table.
Yeah. That's all it is. I mean, it's a little, you're being really, really playful with the interpretation at that point. But
Well, so the final sort of a interesting thing, I don't know what to call it, that I'd like to try and communicate is
mhm,
that this notion of if you do work in the traditional world, you have some IP
mhm.
and you can trade that in full. But in the Dreamcatcher world, you can never ever relinquish the contribution, or you can never relinquish that the world owes you something. You can never relinquish that you contributed. You can decrease it, and one of the ways you can decrease it is you can accept payment from other people that was almost like a donation or a recognition or a thank you or a something for your
Yep.
contribution, but it's not, you didn't trade a thing, you just accepted money from someone else to say thank you for making it, and that goes into this equation that's used to determine
Yeah.
who gets
You
what
just
for
put
it.
another. you just put another Y splitter on the flow, right? That's
Right,
like it's all additive. You never
right,
remove anything or shift something into another flow. You just tap a little bit more out.
right, right. And
And I
so
think
what you're saying is that if you squint your eyes, that looks like some sort of a weird game that you were playing that just put money in a different place.
yeah, if you so I think we're actually saying the same thing, right? And I think that it's down to like exactly how you phrase the semantics of the stock exchange program, right? You're not exchanging anything. You're just inviting somebody else to like
Right.
add their own outbound flow onto the chain of flows that you've built.
Okay. And then so I send you $1,000,
Mm-hmm.
you still get some attribution every time someone uses the Fibonacci program.
Mm-hmm.
I get a little bit, you get a little bit. But then,
Who's like, it's my fucking decision what to do with my attribution, right?
well,
Like,
it's
if
not. Well, once you get it, yes, but it's you're not trading your attribution.
no,
It's
it's
it's paid to you, and you can spend it any way you like, right?
yeah, it still seems to me like you're part of the attribution chain, whether you assign it onto someone else after or not. You're not saying someone else gets my piece of the attribution chain. You're saying I'm going to split like the outbound side of my attribution chain so that only part of it comes to me and part of it goes to someone else. It is still always going through me, right?
No, that's not what that's supposed to be. What you're
No,
saying is that you're splitting your contribution record, where
right.
you're accepting some money from someone else as a late contribution to the thing you already did, and you're affirming that I am accepting this as a part of the contribution that I made.
Mhm.
It's now partly due to this guy because he gave me money at this date after it was done.
Right. But I'm just thinking about it as like why I keep saying Y splitters and flows
It's a fascinating way to talk about it. That's a fascinating way to think.
is like I think what's going to make or break any system like this is exactly how immutable history is, right? Like you are not by trading something, you're basically retroactively eliminating your contribution, right?
In conventional systems, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So if you want to trade something in a world that it's not physically possible to fail to recognize your contributions in the past, you have to find some sort of additive way of indicating the exact same thing in the system. But I'm pretty sure if you just talk about that thing the right way, it'll suddenly not be a security anymore, you know?
So I think you're onto something here because so you own the Fibonacci. You made the original contribution.
Yeah.
I strike a deal with you where I'm like, here's $1,000. I'd like to make a late contribution to the Fibonacci thing. You don't have to take it, but
Yeah.
you could, right? No one says anything about what that's worth. Only the Dreamcatcher ambient attribution system, which is out of control of everyone, makes that decision. Then someone else, this other guy over here, comes up to me and says, hey, this other guy, I can't talk to Ben directly because he won't take my money, but can I give you $1 million as a late contribution to your late contribution? And then you're
Mhm.
like, yeah, sure. You can't relinquish the fact that you put in that $1,000 at that time, held it for X amount of time, right? So even though this guy put money in, every time you get attribution, he's going to get some, but you're never going to get none.
That's right. It always goes through me first in a certain sense, right? Because like
Right.
that's an unchangeable fact about history is that I was
Mhm.
there at that moment and I deserve some sort of right, like some
But
sort of
I
right
think
of
you're onto
control of the
something. If you
yeah,
just talk about that system in the right way,
yeah.
it sounds like not a security.
Right. So trading implies that I'm giving you access to his thing. I'm only giving you access to my thing, right? And
Trading implies you relinquish something, but you're
yeah,
just accepting you're accepting a contribution.
Yeah. I think it's like, another way of thinking about that is like everything has been the only thing you can act on are things that have been reified, right? Like you can't act on speculative things. You can only act on things that are real.
Right.
Um, you can. Obviously, people can still speculate. And I'm sure another class of problems you're going to have here is um, people coordinating with each other off of the system and then just following the rules the right way on the system in order to make it
No,
not a security. But you can't stop that from happening anywhere, right? Like
people do that all the time.
you can. That's
Okay. And then another really interesting concept is this thing of treating the act of the exchange is just another API call that costs you a certain amount to run.
mhm.
And there's got to be something there where we can treat it like in-game currency, like you bought some in-game goods or some in-game things. Like if the contribution was considered a game, and then when people in the game use the goods, then they pay you something. Like
Mhm.
that's kind of what we're doing.
You will find a substantial difficulty dealing with entities such as Stripe if you position the thing you're building too close to gambling. Gambling, that's the other way of looking at the other way of looking at speculating and security, like Howey tests and stuff. Is there's a certain class of financial um, products that um, just support the system, and then there's a certain class that like act like gambling, right?
Yeah,
And the game thing is going to tease the question of gambling a little bit. You'd have to be very careful about how you phrase it.
that's true.
But
An interesting thought experiment I had, because I think there's going to be an issue about the fact that where does the attribution calculation take place? And if we're saying, well, it's not on our system, it's on the Dreamcatcher network, it's like, where is it? And we're like, well, I don't know, these three different guys ran this program and reached consensus on it. Is that enough? Maybe, maybe not. But an interesting way to look at it is if you just spun a dice on the Ethereum chain, which is accepted as being decentralized,
mhm.
you know, is the attribution then a decentralized decision because it's out of anyone's hand and it's just a random thing? I mean,
I mean, dice like a PRNG dice or an actual random number dice.
like an actual random number, you just use the Ethereum block hash as like, based on this hash,
Right.
we're
So
going to now calculate the attribution payout for everyone in the Dreamcatcher. And it's like,
right,
prove to me that that's better or worse than an AI doing the work for you.
right. Yeah, as long as it's a pseudo random, I think that's fine. As soon as you get into the true random territory, you know that there's like some individual actor out there that has more influence, right?
Okay.
Whether that actor is a machine's entropy that you're harvesting, like an individual machine's entropy
Yeah,
that
okay.
you're harvesting.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so the crowdfunding, what do you think about that?
Yeah, but what you've outlaid there with like the company that the crowdfunding is going into, I mean, I'd be curious to see what sort of rights you are selling to people. I mean, there's going to be a certain amount of rights that they'll actually go in for, and a certain amount that they probably won't.
What would you think they wouldn't go in for?
Well, so control over this corporation is something that I think people would probably go in for, right? But if that corporation can't do anything, then like that's going to be the first question you're asked. I think.
The corporation can't control the Dreamcatcher. The corporation can control which tasks it puts money against,
Okay.
and it can control which tasks it sells off. which I need to redefine what those words are based on the model we just talked about. But for old time's sake, let's call it selling. What contribution records it sells and what contribution records it purchases is that's what the company does.
Right.
And by holding those contribution records and collecting the revenue shares from gateways that are following the Dreamcatcher attribution system to pay out for usage, that's what you get back for putting money into the company.
Yeah, I think I would buy into that. I can't, like, that seems like a cool thing, as long as there was existence enough of the ecosystem at that point that it was clear what those powers were capable of giving you in the long
So
run.
what I think existence in the ecosystem is that if I can get a CRM app installed in a real company that they use every day, and their usage data is public, so not the specifics of what they use, but the amount of consumption from the hosting company is there, and if their initial payment for the system was put through the crowdfunding platform as a way to uh, basically take, I'm like, well, you can either pay us or you can pay this, you can buy some securities in this company. It's pretty obvious which one people would take, right? They're like, sure, I'll take the securities.
Mhm.
And then, we go around finding other customers and we offer them the same deal. We're like, well, you can purchase this crowdfunded equity or you can pay the money directly. What do you want to do? Um,
Yeah.
and the second usage would be an actual cloud platform that you can come in and enter a credit card in and start doing fun stuff with. And
Hmm.
from that, I'm like, well, here's the model, here's the bits that we need. Um, here's what we want to do with the money.
Yeah. Um, a very interesting thing for that entity to work on first is software to help, like, balance the fairness of all the people who bought into it voting what they want to do.
Yeah, well, that seems a natural part of what the system needs to handle, and I think
Yeah.
that promoting that as being like, this is one of the key pieces we're gonna build, is so that,
Right.
and I might even make it that you can't purchase our equity unless you do so using our platform, because if you don't understand what the platform does or doesn't, you're a liability, because
Right.
you're gonna at some point decide that it doesn't do what you imagined it did, even though you had the chance to go see for yourself, and now you want out. So that's no good.
Your job, if you bought into the real company with equity, with real equity, is to basically vote all the time. And I like the idea of seeding the whole system with, like, an object that all it does is learn how to be fair to people. I don't know.
Yeah, that's the thing I want, man.
Yeah.
Such an object should be in the world.
So I think that, like, that company, just the natural inclination of the people that bought into it to want to participate is, like, going to generate very useful information that you can use to
Yeah,
start to tune the system.
yeah. That's why I liked crowdfunding, because it meant users, and it
Mhm.
meant interested users.
Yeah.
So my agony, I suppose, is using a traditional equity model going to in some way endanger the purity of the Dreamcatcher's function?
Um,
Or is it going to help it because people don't yet understand how the Dreamcatcher works, because we haven't built it and we ourselves don't fully understand it yet, blah, blah, blah. But if we give them something familiar, like a company vehicle, and it engages with this new kind of fairness distribution mechanism. Is that bad? Maybe it's not.
So one of the things that you said earlier there about that I really like is it just becomes another actor. If you can basically treat it as by default, it's a very flat thing. It doesn't have the turmoil that a traditional like equity structure would have inside of it. It
What
acts
do you mean by flat?
like
No
like
stuff.
it acts according only to its own will as an individual actor on the system and not representing all of the people that compose the company as individual actors inside of it. Basically, I think that
I don't
like
know.
as long as it right, as long as it's used as like a containment mechanism, the company like to I think that like if the people who are investing in the company want to jump on and engage with the system as individuals through like the Dreamcatcher fairness mechanisms,
Right.
then they pay. They just go and put in their credit card and pay and do it, right?
You mean like if someone bought into the crowdfunding equity model, then and they wanted more and they understood the system, then they should really go and participate in the Dreamcatcher directly.
Yeah, right. And they shouldn't try and take the internal turmoil of the company and project it into the dream catcher space,
Can you give
basically,
me an
right?
example of what that might be?
I'm saying if you're worried about containing like the traditional equity structure somehow, um, and making sure that it doesn't poison the model, then the right choice is to put it in a bubble like a company and say that like whatever action this company has on the system, it only looks like one actor. Like we're not thinking at all about the inner equity, the inner like fights between the people inside the company, the like whatever else is happening with those shares on the real world's like equity markets,
So I would imagine that when that actor gets paid
Mm-hmm.
by the Dreamcatcher, there would be a portion that would go to the company structure that would
Mm-hmm.
be dispersed amongst shares, but the algorithm should also be able to look inside as to who put in what money when to the company and at what price, and also make an individual assignment that goes directly to that person as opposed to the company as a whole, because that's one of the great unfairness pieces of a company is, first of all, the share split ratio, but second of all, that holding one share that you acquired in one way is the same as holding it from another one acquired another way. Like that just ain't so,
Right.
and that obliterates a lot of information or nuance about how that contribution to acquire that share came to be.
Right. Yeah. So what I'm saying is like for sure you would want the Dreamcatcher itself to resolve payments to that company fairly among the individuals that own that company. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to just embed the cap table information from that company inside the Dreamcatcher space because that's poisoning it. What you do want to do is you want to make them earn the fair distribution by saying what parts of running the company belong in the Dreamcatcher space. And then from like the default, if you want to be like nudge style libertarian paternalistic libertarian on them, like you just say this company from the perspective of the Dreamcatcher, the company is a single thing. It gets paid into its account. You guys can go ahead and murder each other for the money if you want. um, like it has no bearing on what's happening inside of Dreamcatcher world unless someone can come up with a proof from something that they made inside this company that like it belongs in the Dreamcatcher world and doesn't poison the fairness bit,
So
right?
I would imagine that ultimately, admitting how grandiose this sounds, but ultimately all information should be included in the Dreamcatcher.
Mm-hmm.
And that would include the intercompany workings, which I would strongly make near zero, where I'm like, this company has no staff. It
Mm-hmm.
has like the minimum registered officers. The people don't even get salaries. It just puts money against tasks in the Dreamcatcher.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah. And I think another important thing is like it acts coherently as an individual entity
Yeah.
If you have any conflict internally that needs to be resolved, you need to turn that into more software that goes out into the Dreamcatcher that you go and consume like through the normal channels somehow.
Do you
you
mean
know?
like if there's a dispute between shareholders of the company saying, hey, we should be doing X, not Y,
Yeah.
what that should really be is it should be information that enters the Dreamcatcher, and then some kind of a voting mechanism software is used to determine whether or not that's the correct path for the company. Is that what you're getting at?
I think so, right? I think so. I think like you need to make it constructive, right? Like you need to make sure that it doesn't just leak into the Dreamcatcher world
I
as
still
like,
don't understand what you mean by leak and
yeah,
turmoil and spill over, these kinds of things. I don't have a picture of that in my head.
I think of a company as like a. You told me once to think of a company as a blast radius for like doing fucked up stuff, and I think that's a great way of thinking about it. Right? Is this company exists to really like you're selling normal equity on normal equity markets in the world, and for sure that's useful information to put into the Dreamcatcher and model. But like what you don't want to do is you don't want to give it any sort of gravity that it starts to attract anything else that's happening as organic activity on the Dreamcatcher, because then
Like what?
because then people will come towards it rather than like it being ejected, right? The way you build this thing is to eventually make it less and less important, is my opinion. That's what I mean by leaking is like, fine, go ahead and put the information out there on the system, and fine, go ahead and put whatever voting mechanisms you want out there for internal resolution in the company. But
Right.
you just don't want to make the shares of this company into a deeply meaningful object in the Dreamcatcher world.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's not. Absolutely, it's not.
Right. But people are going to try to do that, is what I think is going to happen.
So
People are going to,
they'll try to make it be that shares in this company equals shares in the Dreamcatcher.
or something very meaningful, like, my opinion carries more weight because I'm the founder, right? Like I'm one of the first 10 shareholders. Like, actually, honestly, that's so antithetical to the proper functioning of the system, in my opinion.
Okay.
One of the things that grosses me out the most about current technology culture is just how powerful and important the word founder is. Like it's,
Right.
you know what, this is just a dude who like had a banker friend at the right point in time, 90% of the time, right? 10% of the time they're like savants, they're geniuses that like created the future. But I also think that mythology is like overblown most of the time. Um, what I think will naturally happen is the people who buy into it originally are going to come and try and be big swinging dicks on the system and say like, oh, I'm like a true original certifier of what's valuable and important, and like when I speak everyone has to listen. It's like
Right.
it's more favorable to early entrance into the game, whereas I think what the world needs is a system that's more favorable to late entrance in the game, because
Yeah. So, but the conundrum is that we got to start with the early entrants,
Mhm.
and it gets very popular very quick if people carry that mistaken belief into this entity and then
Right.
realize that actually long before they joined provision was made to entice new membership as well into the Dreamcatcher proper,
Right.
that this entity was just the bootstrapping entity. It needed to take some risk, it needed to attract some people. It's like how the Ethereum ICO used Bitcoin.
Right.
So we're like, we got to use the existing model.
Yeah. The first compilation of any new language is always in another language, right? Until it
Yeah,
can self-host. I
exactly. Exactly.
so so I think, thinking a little bit more about this, like concretely, what worries me is you're building a type of object which is a original company share,
Yep.
which like people will try and lob around as like as a totem of their power, and like
And they
and
will be able to. They will be able to. But the Dreamcatcher knows how to, or should know how to allocate to those things um, in a fair way. I think.
it is it is tradable on the outside market though, right? So
Yeah.
like it is an object that like does not function as a non-securitizable object, um, unless you model.
Yeah.
So so maybe what you would want to do is use those shares as the first thing to like truly model to the non-securitizable exchange concept out, right? Like where they're doing whatever they're doing in the real world, trading the shares back and forth.
Mm.
But like the representation of it in Dreamcatcher is additive. It's like it's showing that like these are the historical value chains here,
Oh,
basically.
so like an introspective tool, like
Right.
almost like a reflection on itself, where it's like these shares are not a Dreamcatcher native object; they're an external object, and we interpret them in the Dreamcatcher as having this meaning when we calculate contribution over time and therefore
Right.
attribution. Right.
Or yeah, that's right. So like, I can think of the way that you would really design this out. I'm sorry to go off into like weird woo woo land, but
No,
every time if you built it right, explicit is better than implicit is what I'm trying to say. If you've built it right, every time you create a share in the seed company,
yeah.
it creates an equivalent object in Dreamcatcher that still follows the Dreamcatcher rules, right? That like,
Oh, that seems bad. That
yeah,
seems bad. Yeah, that seems bad because the the company is a virtual thing. It's
mhm,
not a real thing, and it's not a work product. The Dreamcatcher
right,
is about what useful thing got made and who contributed to making it.
right,
And trading shares or issuing shares is not useful work in any way.
right.
It's completely arbitrary. So maybe could I simplify the whole thing down and say that if we program the first version of the Dreamcatcher to only recognize the company as though it was a single actor or a single person
Yeah, yeah,
making contributions in and out, and then just ignore what's happening in the share table of that company and rely on traditional tools to figure that out, and then wait until we get a bit more advanced to be able to, maybe some people need some special notion, maybe some of the very early buy-ins need special recognition, but it would never be calculated on a special case. It would be just saying this is how we interpret funding rounds in terms of what people should get in the Dreamcatcher. It's not a specific thing to this company. It's just this is how we look at every company now.
right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's what I was originally, the gut feeling was there when I talked about leaking or spilling over, right? Is like you don't want the internal dynamics of the company to dictate any of the structure of Dreamcatcher if you can
Oh,
help it.
absolutely not.
And
Absolutely not.
and
That's the point of putting it into making it appear as opposed to a house or a
yeah,
host. Like it acts like another actor. It's a powerful actor,
mhm,
and it's one that I'll be driving myself in the best way I can figure out. But it's not. It doesn't have any power of any. It's no more special than a person with the equivalent amount of money in the Dreamcatcher. That's
right. Yeah, to the extent that you even want to represent the internal dynamics of the thing, like
mm,
it needs to happen in a way that doesn't break the fairness of the Dreamcatcher, right? So like I think there's a long-term goal for that company of figuring out how to bring everyone inside of it on board, like through their equity or whatever, right? But like it needs to be
oh, right. Okay,
incremental.
so that like a good story for that company then is to say that in order to truly fairly appraise every one of the crowdfunding shareholders' contributions, we need a bunch more tooling and software.
Mhm.
We're going to use the money raised from this thing to build that software. And once we've figured out how to do that, then we're going to attribute to the individuals as opposed to this company. And the value of the company will be dispersed amongst all the shareholders and whoever's left, whoever registered can continue to receive their direct Dreamcatcher attribution, or something like that, right? Is that sort of what?
Yep.
Yeah. Where we're like, this thing is there to light the fuse. It's there to build these tools that we don't have, and it's eventually going to disappear, and all of the individuals will walk out and be treated as individuals for their contribution into this company and receive perpetual revenue share for the pieces that they